Chapter 24. For the convalescent hospital in the Emerald Valley, Hugh and I found a homestead in Springwood with a magnificent garden of liquid amber, all in fresh leaf, white cedar, elms, and pines. There was a bevy of peafowl wandering about, including a tame peacock who we nicknamed King George because of his regal manner. As breathtakingly beautiful as the Blue Mountains were for a location, they brought complications. They were not mountains that you climbed to reach their peaks. Rather, you started at their peaks and climbed down into the valleys, sometimes at a descent of 2,000 feet. It was only logical that if we went down into the valleys to shoot a scene, the return trip was going to be an upward climb with heavy camera equipment, props, costumes, and supplies strapped to our backs. I felt responsible for the safety of our 10-year-old star, Billy Sullman, who had played David Copperfield at the Theatre Royal, and his guardian aunt, May Sullman. The other actor in my care was our prince, James Blake, an unknown player who we had taken from a suburban theatre. The rest of the cast and crew consisted of my family. "We decided it was the only way we were going to see you," said Uncle Ota, climbing out of the equipment truck that had been driven by Ranjana. I blinked when I saw Thomas. Gone was his chubby face. He now had cheekbones and a defined chin. His legs were like long tree limbs under his shorts. He bounded through the gate and down the path towards me. There was no trace of a limp in his stride. A twinge of regret pinched my heart when I remembered who was responsible for that miracle. But I had learnt to turn those memories away. "You are a little man," I said, hugging Thomas. "You are not a baby anymore." He pressed his cheek to me. "I've missed you," he said. Clara, Robert, the twins, and Esther arrived the following day in Robert's car. Emily clapped her pudgy hands when she saw me. "I'm looking forward to getting some sleep again now you are reunited," said Clara, throwing her arms around my waist. She stood back a moment and glanced over me. A smile lit her face. "You look well," she said. "Thank you for understanding," I told her. She took my hand and squeezed it. She was going to play the princess, and Uncle Ota the doctor. Ranjana would be taking care of the continuity as well as supervising the rushes. Robert was to travel to and from locations to deliver supplies and courier the finished scenes to the development laboratory in Sydney. Esther had come along to babysit. "We have to minimize low-priority items," Robert instructed us. "Everyone must share a tent, and we must limit our cutlery. Only 2 sets of knives, forks, spoons, and plates are to be shared between the cast and crew." I wondered how Hugh was going to manage the steep descents along with his camera equipment. But for a man with one leg, he was more agile than the rest of us, and I remembered how I had seen him maneuver himself along the scaffolding for Peter's film. As we would be departing from the established tracks for filming, we hired a bushman by the name of Jimmy Ferguson as our guide. Hugh and I found him at the pub in Blackheath. I remained near the door as women were not welcome in that domain, while Hugh asked who was the best guide in the area. "A lady by the name of Mrs. Rockcliffe, lives in Katoomba," the publican answered. "Bit of a loner, but she'll take good care of you. That's what all the tourists say." From Hugh's silence, I imagined he was trying not to laugh. "All right. Who's the second best guide in the area? We're going into rugged terrain." There was a murmur of voices. "You want Jimmy Ferguson," a man shouted. The other patrons mumbled their agreement. "Knows the bush like the back of his hand." Hugh came out of the pub, grinning. I was glad that he had taken the assumption about his disability so well. As for me being a guide, how had I developed a reputation so quickly? I could not have helped more than 6 people. "Well, Mrs. Rockcliffe," Hugh laughed, "if our picture doesn't work out, you know what else you can do to amuse yourself." We found Jimmy Ferguson living in a house of rubble stones on the edge of a cliff with his Aboriginal wife, who came from the Darug people. Jimmy was about 65 years old, with grey hair and raw-looking skin. The age of his ebony-complexioned wife was indiscernible. With her smooth skin and black hair, she could have been 30, but her missing teeth and rotund stomach made her look closer to 60. Despite their rough-hewn appearances, it was clear from the way Jimmy and his wife spoke that they were intelligent people. After listening to our request, Jimmy scratched his beard and said that he would guide us if his wife, who answered to the name of Betty, could come along too. She's got superior bush skills and a sense of direction like an eagle. She can cook for you too. Save you lugging stuff up and down the mountains. She'll find it for you down there in the valleys. We needed someone to organise the catering because Esther was staying at my house to look after the children. But eating goannas, snakes and possums was not something we would do. I wanted to capture the rock wallabies on film, not on my plate. "Ah, no worries, love," Jimmy assured me. "No animal need come to harm in the making of your picture. Betty knows where to find all the nectars, berries, fruits and tubers you could want, and her seed Johnny cakes are the best around." On Tuesdays, we waited at the post office to receive Robert's telegram after the latest scenes had been developed. Scene 11, Slate 4. Not good. Too dark and flat. Rest fine. Timing was important on location because the weather could change in an instant. Once, in the Groves Valley, Clara complained that her makeup was melting. We used the sun for our lighting, and close-ups involved catching its rays with a mirror and reflecting them into the actor's face. In her elaborate costume of tulle and sequins, Clara was uncomfortably hot. The rest of us were wilting also. Betty brought pannikins of water from the stream, but the drinks provided only temporary relief. Then, out of nowhere, a bracing wind began to blow, and clouds loomed on the horizon. Streaks of lightning stabbed the sky. It was atmospheric, and Hugh kept the camera rolling while Ranjana stood by his side holding an umbrella. I was torn between getting the shot and the safety of the cast and crew. Robert took over and moved the cast to a nearby cave where he built a fire, and Betty and Jimmy set about making Billy tea. Robert was not as sharp as Freddie had been about what made a good story, but he was helpful in stepping in where he was needed. I had worried about Hugh's ability to handle the terrain with one leg, but I should have been concerned about myself. In the film, the boy's wheelchair became a flying chariot. Hugh insisted we needed shots of the valley from the air. A plane would not produce the floating effect Hugh was after, so he contacted a mining company near the ruined castle to ask if we could use their flying fox cable mechanism to get a bird's-eye view of the chasm. Hugh was as stubborn as a donkey. It was the only explanation I could give for how he managed to persuade the supervisor to let a one-legged man and a woman use one of the flying foxes when workmen were forbidden from travelling on them due to safety regulations. The only restriction the supervisor put on us was that the trip be taken in clear weather. I was horrified by Hugh's suggestion that we risk our lives to get a once-in-a-lifetime shot of the valley. "If one of the cables break, we are going to plummet to our deaths," I told him. "If the cables can carry shale, they can carry us," he said. With such confidence, I wondered if he had gone mad. And yet, I must have been the one who had lost my sanity, because in the end, I did exactly what he told me to do. "We'll put the director in first, then myself and the camera," Hugh told the workman, who had been assigned to help us by operating the flying fox. I was glad that we had told the others they would not be needed for this scene and could have the day off. The workman helped me into the open-topped crate, which was nothing more than some pieces of hardwood nailed together. Hugh positioned himself with his leg in the crate and straddled the side so as to get an uninterrupted view of the gorge. My job was to hold onto his belt to stop him from falling because he needed both his hands to operate the camera and keep it steady. I was also supposed to take notes of the shots by leaning my notebook against his back and writing with my free hand. I had no idea how I was going to do that with my fingers trembling so violently. Once I was in position, I felt like a circus escape artist about to be lowered into a pool of crocodiles. There was no backing out now. My mouth was dry and it hurt to swallow. From this great height, the valley was silent. A wedge-tailed eagle circled the sky. I shivered when I realized that it was eye level with me. "Hold on! Here she goes!" called one of the workers, releasing the brake while the other two gave us a push off from the station. The crate jerked down the rocky slope towards the edge of the cliff. This is not so bad, I told myself, gazing out at the magnificent stretch of green. I leaned over Hugh's shoulder and instructed him to film the treetops. While we travelled over the slope of the mountain, with the ground not too far from our feet, I felt calm enough to look at the station across the valley, where a handful of miners were waiting for us. I wished it were closer and prayed that it would not take us long to reach it. Then the crate passed over the edge of the plateau, and the full expanse of the valley appeared below us. My stomach lurched with the sensation of falling. I tried to concentrate on note-taking, but my hand dripped with sweat and smudged the letters. "You all right?" Hugh called to me. I was glad he could not see my face. I took a gulp of air. This was not the place to panic. "I am fine," I answered. "It's beautiful," Hugh muttered. "It's like a dream." 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted in my head. I seized on the idea that if I kept counting in lots of 100, it would only take 10 lots before we reached the safety of the station. Then the unfathomable happened. The mechanism slowed down as we reached the halfway point. It creaked, then came to a halt. The crate swung for a moment before stopping as well. I looked up. The pulley was stuck. Hugh stopped filming and waved to the workers on the plateau. I could tell from their dumbfounded expressions that we were in trouble. What could anybody do to help us? We were dangling 1,000 feet above the valley. "Sit down and hold on," Hugh told me. He secured the camera to the side of the crate with a piece of rope, grabbed the cable, and stepped up onto the side of the crate. It dipped, and the valley gaped below me. I clutched the sides, but Hugh could not get the pulley unstuck fast enough, and I began to slip. My vision turned white. "Keep your eyes closed and hold tight," Hugh shouted. I found myself thinking about Freddie. "Adela, you can do it," he would have said. Hugh managed to get the pulley unstuck. The crate returned to its upright position, and he inched us along the length of cable towards the station. A few minutes later, I was lifted out of the crate by the miners and placed on firm ground. It was over an hour before the strength returned to my legs and I was able to walk with the others to the tramway that would take us back to the top of the gorge. I did not utter a sound. The minutes of stark, cold fear on the Flying Fox had taken my voice away. Hugh held my hand and asked me if I was all right. I was surprised that he was unaffected by what had happened, and even less by what could have happened. "It doesn't serve me to ask what could have happened," Hugh said. "I did that for years over my leg. We got the shot we wanted, and both of us are still here, right?" Hugh's words were not bravado. Once we were back at the mine, he laughed about the incident with the workers and shouted them beer and cigarettes. As for me, whether we got the shot or not, I was affected by what had happened. I developed a terror of heights. With the scenes at Springwood and Katoomba completed, we had only to film the final ones at Jenolan Caves, which we had chosen to represent our Valley of Darkness. The beauty of the caves was more spectacular than evil, but with the right angles and filters, the cliff faces, cave openings, and the surrounding bushland could be twisted into something menacing. The first day of shooting, Hugh and I rose before dawn to film the wildlife for our Emerald Valley scenes. Ranjana was suffering a migraine, and Esther came with us instead to take the continuity notes. I wondered how Esther felt about working with Hugh again. She behaved professionally, if somewhat aloofly towards him. She has moved on, I thought. But whether that was good or bad, I did not know. I still thought she and Hugh would be good for each other. The light was too dim for us to capture on film the ringtail possums scurrying to their drays, or the wombat who eyed us cautiously while rubbing himself against a tree. But when the sun broke the sky and the early morning light shimmered over the bush, we filmed rock wallabies bounding across a ridge, a flock of cockatoos swooping through the sky, and a family of kookaburras squatting together on a branch. In a fern gully, we found a lyrebird scratching the scrub. He was a natural actor and broke into a song and dance, opening his magnificent feathered tail the moment the camera started rolling. "The lyrebird is an unsurpassed mimic," Uncle Ota had once told me. "He can imitate not only the sounds of a cockatoo or wren, but also of a train whistle or a howling dog." On our way back to the Blue Lake, Hugh found 2 koalas asleep in the fork of a gum tree, and I directed him to film them from so many different angles that Esther was compelled to remind me that we had limited film stock. We ate lunch with our actors and crew at Cave's house before completing a battle scene at the Devil's Coach House. Then we trekked through the bush towards McKeown's Valley, where we intended to film the final battle between the heroes and the evil spirits. We had left Jimmy and Betty behind at Cave's house, with Ranjana and the children, to clean our camping and other equipment before we departed for Sydney the following day. We soon missed Betty's remedies when we found ourselves covered in welts from stinging nettles. Although there were clouds in the sky, the light remained consistent, and the shooting of the first scenes went smoothly. I was struck by the silence of the valley. There was not a bird or an insect to be heard. The manager of Cave's house had lent us some of the staff as extras in return for a film credit, and we had managed to recruit local farmhands and a pastoral family. Although that amounted to only 20 people with which to create a battle scene, Hugh and I used them ingeniously. We shot the actors in wooded areas rather than open ones, so that the trees became characters in themselves. For the first scenes, I had the good characters move towards the right, with the intention of recostuming everyone as evil beings and filming them moving towards the left. It was a trick Clara and I had observed in low-budget westerns, where the cowboys moved in one direction and the Indians, played by the same actors, moved in the other. While the actors were changing their costumes, I sat down on my stool to make notes on the scene descriptions. Hugh passed me to adjust one of the light reflectors. A flash of gold shot up from the grass. My heart leapt to my throat. "Snake!" I cried. The reptile flattened its head aggressively. Hugh turned, but it was too late. The snake struck his shin, then disappeared in the grass. "Damn!" Hugh swore, grabbing his leg. Clara was at his side in an instant. "Are you sure it was a snake?" she asked me. I nodded. "Look in the grass," she instructed the rest of us. "See what kind it was." While we were searching for the snake, Clara made Hugh sit down. "Does it hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "At first I thought I'd trodden on a stick and it had whipped me." Robert lifted Hugh's trouser leg to the place he had been bitten. I stopped to see what he was doing. I remembered when Clara and I used to walk in Thirroul, she had told me that most snake bites through clothing resulted in scratches, and not all bites injected venom. But I could see the 2 puncture marks from where I was standing, and that the wound was swollen. The snake had struck deeply. "Let's hope it's a black," whispered Uncle Ota, who was searching next to me. The black snake was venomous, but not as deadly as the browns, copperheads, tigers, and death adders. The snake I had seen had been gold. I saw something slithering under a rock. I caught sight of the last part of its body. "Stripes," I said. Clara and Robert tied Hugh's belt as a tourniquet around his leg. I could tell my description was bad news because Clara turned pale. "A striped black snake, then?" Esther piped up. She knelt down beside Hugh. I shook my head. The snake I had seen was striped like a tiger. Black snakes had red or yellow bellies, but no stripes. Clara had told me that years ago. Then something in Esther's eyes stopped me. The sign in Philip's reception room flashed into my mind. Your sickness can affect your personality, or your personality can affect your sickness. Hugh broke into a sweat. Drops of moisture dripped down his forehead and cheeks. I prayed it was shock and not the poison. "God," he said through gritted teeth. "Am I going to die?" "No," Esther told him. "But it would have been better if the snake had bitten your other leg." Despite the gravity of the situation, Hugh managed to grin. Clara told Uncle Ota to make a fire and heat up his pocket knife. She was going to cauterize the wound. Then she turned to Hugh. "You have got to stay still. You will be fine as long as you do what I tell you." Robert and Esther pushed down on Hugh's shoulders while Uncle Ota held his leg. Could the mind defeat a deadly poison, I wondered? Esther had lied about the color of the snake to trick Hugh. I had not heard of anyone surviving a bite from a deadly snake, especially not so far from a hospital. "Bloody hell!" Hugh screamed when Clara pressed the heated knife into the wound. The air stank of singed flesh. Hugh's speech was slurred and his eyes twitched. I fought back my tears. Surely he was not going to die. "We have to get him back to the hotel," Clara said. "Jimmy will know what to do next." "But he can't walk," said Esther. "We need to make him a stretcher." I admired how Esther was taking control of things. I was the director of the picture, but I had no idea what to do. When we arrived back at Cave's house an hour later, Hugh was unconscious. We carried him to his room where Jimmy looked at the wound. "You've done all you can," he said to us. "It's up to God now." Betty disappeared into the bush to collect medicinal berries and mud to use as a poultice against infection. "My people sit in the river before losing consciousness, but it's too late now," she said. Darkness was falling and there was no chance of travelling the treacherous winding road to fetch the nearest doctor. But as Jimmy had already told us, all that could be done for Hugh had been done. Esther stayed by Hugh's side, checking his pulse every quarter of an hour and listening to his breathing. She was watching for signs of respiratory paralysis as desperately as we had searched for them in Thomas when he struggled with polio. "You'll make it, Hugh," she kept telling him. "You're strong." Sometimes his eyes would flutter open, and I was sure he had heard what she said to him. I imagined Esther wished she could have been there for Louis when he was suffering on the battlefield. A short while before dawn, I was shaken awake by Esther. It took me a moment to realize that I was lying in the armchair in my room and not the bed. Esther held a lamp near her face. She was pale, and her pupils were dilated. "Hugh?" I asked, sitting up. "Is he dead?" Esther shook her head. "I think he's going to be all right." Although Hugh was well a few days later, I insisted we take him back to Sydney to rest. We only had the shots of the extras playing the evil beings to complete, and we could return to the mountains for those. I was not worried about the cost. I was worried about Hugh. Robert and Clara invited Hugh to stay in Lindfield, and I went with them. When she could see he was better, Esther withdrew her ministrations and let Clara and Mary take over Hugh's care. One afternoon, Robert, Esther, and I were discussing the editing of the first part of the Emerald Valley in the Swan's sitting room, while Hugh was resting on the veranda, when Peter arrived. "I heard the news," Peter said to Hugh when I showed him to the veranda. "You are very lucky. Why didn't you have Jallo with you? He would have given the thing a run for its money." Robert and I sat down with Hugh and Peter, while Esther joined Clara in the garden, where she was playing with the twins. "I think it is kookaburras you are thinking of," I told him. "Cockatoos don't eat snakes." It was nice to see Peter again, and even though it was spring, he still wore his cap and scarf. "Not many people survive a tiger snake bite, my friend," Peter said. "Certainly not one as deep as the one you received." "We're not sure it was a tiger snake," Robert told him, "but it was something deadly. It was probably Hugh's build that saved him." Hugh, who had been quiet while we were speaking, shook his head. He gazed out to the garden where Esther was tickling Marta. "No," he said. "It was something else." When the editing of the Emerald Valley was completed, I returned to the cottage to await Robert's news on distribution. The first thing I did on arriving home was to drag a ladder to the side of the house to see where my resident mountain possum was entering the roof. The air had summer in it, and the garden was bursting with new shoots and flowers. I found a space near the eaves above one of the bedrooms and peered into the hole. I could make out the fur of the sleeping possum and the rise and fall of his rump as he breathed. Because summer was hot in the mountains, I slept with all the windows in the house open. The possum, who I had named MP, liked the arrangement, and sometimes I would hear rustling in the kitchen at night and find him sitting on the table working his way through the fruit bowl. "MP, what are you doing?" I would scold him. "Go and eat some gum leaves." MP would slow down his chewing and hold the piece of fruit in his front paws, responding to my lecture with an innocent stare. He must have sensed my soft spot for him, because more than once I awoke at dawn to find him in bed with me, curled up against my leg. "This has got to stop, MP," I told him. "You are not a cat. Go and find yourself a nice girl possum and have some babies." To help MP readjust to his life as a possum, I cut wood from the timber pile and made him a box with an opening in the front. I took some of his nesting material from the roof when he was out for the evening and put it in the box, then rubbed a slice of apple around the opening. The next morning I pulled out the ladder with the intention of securing the box in the pine tree, near where MP exited the roof in the evenings. I wanted to place the box as high as possible so that he would be safe from cats and foxes, but once I got to the top of the ladder, I froze, memories of my experience in the flying fox over the valley flooding back to me. I managed to steel myself enough to bind the box to the tree and secure it in place. Then I gingerly climbed down the ladder, my heart thumping. "He had better use the box," I said to myself. "I don't think I have the courage to move it somewhere else." A few weeks later, I received a telegram from Robert. I drove to Sydney full of expectation. I had asked him to secure the State Theatre for the premiere of the Emerald Valley. It would not be showing at Tilly Cinema this time, because after the Royal Commission, Uncle Ota had retired from the industry. He had sold his cinemas on the south coast to Wollongong Theatres and Tilly Cinema to Greater Union. "All the fun in screening Australian films is gone," Uncle Ota told me. "It doesn't look as if the states are going to cede the powers the Commonwealth needs to implement the recommendations made by the Commission. Australian production is at its all-time lowest, and no one is going to do a thing about it. But even if America doesn't finish the local industry off, then sound on film will." During the editing of The Emerald Valley, Ranjana, Uncle Ota, Thomas, Hugh and I went to see The Jazz Singer at the Lyceum. The picture was billed as the first talking picture, but I had seen a few of those before. When we had been setting up the Cascade Picture Palace, another showman had sound discs to accompany his pictures. Ranjana and I were intrigued and visited his show one afternoon. Things started well enough with a music track and sound effects, but at the beginning of the second reel, something must have jolted the needle, and the picture and sound went out of synchronization. For the rest of the picture, the sound effects did not match the images. A gun went off when a man sat down, and a rooster crowed as a lady began to sing. The showman sweated over his projector, trying to get everything to match again, but he had lost his audience to laughter. Ranjana and I were in stitches all the way home. It was a Saturday night at the Lyceum, and we were treated to an organ recital, a chorus line, and a jazz band that played a few numbers from the picture. After the rendition of God Save the King and a speech from the theatre manager saying that what we were about to see would change our lives, the lights dimmed and the screen lit up. At first it seemed that The Jazz Singer was like any other silent picture, with a recorded soundtrack of music and sound effects, when all of a sudden the soundtrack ceased and the picture shifted to sound on set, with Al Jolson singing. The audience went wild and clapped enthusiastically. "That's it?" I thought, shocked that Al Jolson's voice sounded scratchy and trebled, like a bleating sheep. Afterwards we stopped by the vegetarian cafe and discussed our impressions of the first talkie. "The camera work was poor," said Uncle Ota. "It looked static." "That's because they encase the camera in a booth and shoot through glass so it doesn't pick up background noise and the hum of the lights," Hugh explained. "I've heard that they hide the microphones in flower pots and telephones, and that the actors can't move from the one spot," said Ranjana. "That is probably why I thought it resembled a radio play with pictures," I said, sipping my chamomile tea. "Well, I was impressed," said Hugh. "I think sound on film is where the future of pictures lies." Rubbish, I thought. It is just another fad, like flagpole sitting and dance marathons. I arrived at Lindfield just after 3 in the afternoon and was happy to see that Robert had afternoon tea waiting for me. "Hello," he said, and waved as soon as he saw me step out of the car. He has good news for me, I thought, clenching my hands with excitement. He's got the big one. The State Theatre was due to be completed in a few months. Just when the country's economic problems seemed to be dragging down the mood of Sydney, with factories closing and the Australian picture industry on the brink of collapse, Stuart Doyle had stepped in bravely to build a palace of dreams. I had read that when completed, the theatre would be breathtaking. The interior was to be a fusion of Gothic, Italian, and Art Deco styles, with a Koh-i-Noor-cut crystal chandelier weighing over 4 tons. There would be paintings by William de Bell, Howard Ashton, and Charles Wheeler in the dress circle gallery, and even the restrooms were to be lavishly decorated in different styles reflected by their names: Pompadour, Empire Builders, College, Futurist, Butterfly, and Pioneers. "Clara and Ranjana have gone shopping with the twins and Thomas," Robert said, passing me a plate. I folded my hands in front of me, waiting for Robert's good news. He sat down and looked at his palms for a minute, then at me. My throat suddenly felt dry. "I have approached Greater Union and Hoyt Cinemas about the picture," he said, "but they won't touch it." My heart dropped to my feet. "What do you mean?" Robert grimaced. "Stuart Doyle said The Emerald Valley is the best film ever made in his lifetime, and that you are the finest director, but he won't distribute it." My voice rose in pitch. "Why? Is it something to do with Freddie? I would have been disappointed with a lesser theatre than the State, but now it looked as though there would be no major theatre at all. Robert shook his head. No, it's because it's a silent, and nobody is buying silent pictures anymore. The public have gone crazy over sound films. That's all they want. The silent picture industry is dead. I tried to take in what Robert said, but it was too hard to believe. But it could not have just died overnight, I said. Robert pursed his lips. It has, Adela. It's gone. For good. Chapter 25. The public flocked to the new pictures. They were an escape from the worries about the worsening economy, and it was cheaper to see a light-hearted musical or comedy at the cinema than it was at the theatre. The sound-on-film technology fascinated Hugh. He wanted me to see every new talkie with him. There's merit in the technology, he said. With the sound and film together on one strip, there's no problem with either getting out of synchronization. But the equipment is so expensive. How will we ever afford to remake the Emerald Valley as a sound film? Australia will have to follow the Hollywood model, he replied, bending so Jallo could transfer himself across his shoulder blades. We need to form into studios with continuous productions and contracted actors. My mind drifted to a friend of Mary's who had made a society drama and managed to get it premiered at the Prince Edward Theatre. It had cost all of her inheritance of £6,000 and had not returned her a penny. Still, £6,000 had been enough to produce a picture with P.J. Ramster as the director and Jessica Harcourt and Gaston Mervale as the leads. She would never have been able to do that if she'd had to do it with sound. I thought of all the homespun stories that had been made for under £1,000. That would be impossible now. Out of all those glitzy Hollywood pictures you are so enthusiastic about, Hugh, can you name one that was directed by a woman? He thought for a moment, then shook his head. Our stories will be lost now, I thought. I knew that my picture-making days were over. I longed for beauty. I ached for it. I was sure that I would not discover it in pictures made by large studios with chauvinistic directors whose main concern was commerce, not art. I remembered the first time Clara and I had gone to the cinema with Uncle Ota and Ranjana. Felix the cat coming to life before my eyes had been magic. What I was witnessing on the screen these days was not. The actors' voices dripped with evidence of elocution lessons, and their performances were static. Instead of showing us the story, the producers saved on costs by having the actors tell it. I miss Charlie Chaplin and his funny little mimes, Clara confided in me one day when we were walking with the twins. I enjoyed guessing what the actors were thinking. It was like reading a book. You filled in the gaps with your imagination. Now the comedies are one-liners that get used over and over again, and all the thinking is done for you. The technology will improve, and the art with it, Hugh assured me when I relayed my conversation with Clara to him. Now everyone's enamored with speaking, but they'll find ways to make the camera move, and then visual images will be important again. I will try to keep an open mind to it, I told him. But now I have one more favour to ask of you. Hugh stood back, eyes open wide, when I told him that The Emerald Valley would never be a sound film. I had made it for Freddie, and I was not going to leave it to rot in some vault along with all the other silent films that had been made obsolete overnight. What are you intending to do? He asked. The cinemas aren't going to screen it. I am going to do what Australian directors have been doing for years, only Freddie protected me from it. I am taking The Emerald Valley on the road. "We need another person to help steady the equipment," Hugh said when we were loading the truck for our trip down the south coast. Ranjana was going to drive and Hugh was to navigate. Uncle Ota and Esther were coming with me in the supply van. Thomas was staying in Sydney with Robert and Clara. "So, you want Uncle Ota to go with you?" I asked. "No, you need a male with you in the van. I'm talking about Esther," Hugh said. I raised my eyebrows. The truck was heavy enough now. It was better for more people to travel in the van to avoid the truck getting bogged on muddy roads. "I will be driving in front," I said. "You'll be able to see me. You will need someone stronger to help with the equipment." "But what if we get separated?" said Hugh. His voice was pleading. Ranjana cleared her throat noisily. I glanced in her direction. She rolled her eyes. "Oh," I said, the penny dropping. "All right, Hugh. Esther can go with you." Uncle Ota and I climbed into the van while Ranjana started up the truck. "Just as well you don't act in your films," Uncle Ota said. "You'd be terrible." I glanced back at Esther, who was climbing into the equipment truck. Hugh offered her his hand to help her up. She accepted it cautiously. She had been hurt by his indifference, so I did not blame her for her uncertainty. The roads down south were rough to travel by motor vehicle. Many were nothing more than horse and cart runs. The tracks were often too narrow for the van, and on the first day of our journey we became bogged twice. On the second day, we saw a farmer misjudge the depth of a river crossing. His truck sank like a weight, and it was only quick thinking on Uncle Ota's part to throw the driver a rope that saved him from being washed downstream. The time we lost saving the farmer meant we would not reach the town before dark, so he invited us to camp on his property. The moon was full, and in the firelight I saw Esther and Hugh exchange a glance when Hugh handed her a cup of tea. I envied them the joy of falling in love. I remembered how Esther had been unsure of Hugh the day before when he had offered her his hand. People hurt others all the time, even when they loved them. Especially if they loved them. It was usually because they were in pain themselves. I closed my eyes and for the first time in a long time allowed myself to think about Philip. Since sound films had become important to the fate of the Emerald Valley, I had taken up reading the newspaper again. One day I had seen an article about the aerial medical service. A Presbyterian minister was trying to raise funds for a service to fly doctors to remote areas in the outback when medical assistance was needed. I glanced at the picture. There was Philip standing next to the Reverend John Flynn. My heart had surged with pride. I was happy for him. I opened my eyes again and looked at the stars. I remembered the night that Philip and his father came to our house in Watson's Bay with their telescope, and how Philip had tricked me into believing he knew how I liked my tea. "What are you smiling at?" Ranjana asked, rolling over. "I can see your teeth glowing in the moonlight." "Nothing?" I had not realized I was smiling. "Well, go to sleep," she said. "We have some more driving ahead of us, and we have to make an early start." I tugged the blanket up around my neck and drifted off to sleep, still thinking about Philip. He had found a fulfilling purpose, but something in his expression in the photograph had made him seem lonely. The first stop on our schedule was a town southwest of Thirroul, where we had booked the School of Arts, a ramshackle building that had been erected at the turn of the century. The weather was hot and the sun beating down on the tin roof made me dizzy while I helped unpack the equipment and put out the seats. The hall could hold 200 people, and as the town's regular showmen had left the area to run theatres in Victoria, we expected a good turnout. Sound pictures had not yet reached country New South Wales, so we were one step ahead of them. We put up posters in the town and handed out leaflets in the main street, but on opening night only 3 men and 2 women turned up, and none of them would cross the threshold. "We're not paying," announced one of the party, a man with a sunburned face. "We've paid too much for rubbish before." Uncle Ota assured them that the picture we had to show was of the best quality, and even offered that they come in for free. If they did not like the film, he would not charge them. But the disgruntled 5 shook their heads and walked away. "Why did they come at all if they weren't intending to see the picture?" asked Ranjana. "Just to scoff?" An unsuccessful first night did not bode well for the rest of our journey. We had paid for the School of Arts 4 nights in advance, intending to screen not only the Emerald Valley, but the Bunyip and some other Australian silent films that we had hired. It did not help our spirits when we discovered the local pub owner, who had provided our accommodations, was charging us 3 times his normal rate. "I can't trust you entertainer types," he claimed when Uncle Ota challenged him about the deception. "You're always ready to skip town." We were wondering if we should give up the tour for lost, when I had an idea. "Why don't I replace the scenes in Watson's Bay in the Bunyip with scenes from here?" I said. "People are vain. Surely they will turn up to look at themselves and where they live." The following day we set out to capture the town on film. The baker and the grocer were obliging for the scenes outside their stores, but the rest of the townspeople were unfriendly. I approached a group of men to ask them to act as extras, but they turned their backs on me. The women gave me the same chilly reaction, even when I turned on my charm. "What a lovely dress," I said, approaching a woman standing outside the post office. "It will look nice in our film." The woman turned on her heel and walked into the post office without as much as a backward glance. "We'll be in your film," a voice said. I turned to see a group of boys standing behind me. The spokesperson looked about 9 years old with sandy blonde hair and a smudge of dirt on his nose. The rest of them were as motley, with unevenly buttoned shirts and their socks rolled down. Hugh suggested we film the boys playing cricket. "Here," Uncle Ota said afterwards, handing the boys tickets. "Come to Saturday's matinee. For free." Uncle Ota hurried back to Thirul to get the rushes developed. We were thrilled to see how well the town fitted in with the plot, even though we'd had to keep the scenes on the beach that had been shot in Watson's Bay, and in one frame there was a glimpse of a ferry crossing the harbour. The matinee was attended by the town's children, who brought along their mothers and fathers. The audience applauded at every scene in the Bunyip and enjoyed the pictures we showed afterwards. Most of the parents returned for the Saturday evening session, and we had to bring in extra seats. Even the group who had refused to enter the hall on our first night in town showed up. "Children are the teachers of their parents," Uncle Ota said to me when he saw the crowd lining up at the door. The Emerald Valley was acclaimed by the crowd, who stood up to applaud and confirmed what we already knew. It could have been a hit. Afterwards, Hugh and I fielded questions from the audience about the theme of the film and how it was made. The audience's enthusiasm both buoyed and depressed me. It was wonderful to have the picture well received, but it was sad to know that it had no chance of national distribution. We continued our tour for 2 months, working our way down the coast through the towns of Unanderra, Wongawilli and Dapto, all the way to Nowra, then back up the coast again through Gerringong and Kiama. In Kiama, Hugh met me in the hallway of our hotel when I was on my way down to breakfast. We had finished late the previous night, but he looked refreshed. There was something else different about him. He was smiling. Not just smiling, but beaming. I realized that he was a different person to the man I had first met at the vegetarian cafe. He had softened, but of course I could not tell him that. Do you think we could stay here a few more days? He asked me. Do you like Kiama so much? I thought you had to get back to Sydney. Hugh was suddenly shy and glanced at his hands. What is it? He blushed. Esther likes the church here. We want to get married. I grabbed his shoulder and nearly screamed for joy, but I checked myself. We had been warned by the management not to make too much noise in the mornings. My eyes filled with tears. Hugh, I whispered, that's wonderful. Esther, Ranjana and Uncle Ota were already in the dining room when Hugh and I entered. Jallo was bouncing on Esther's shoulder. It looks like Hugh's best friend has taken to you too, I told her. Esther's face was the mirror of Hugh's. She was beaming too. It pleased me to see her so happy. Perhaps not every love story ended badly. When Hugh told Ranjana and Uncle Ota the news, Ranjana became so excited that the manager rushed out of the kitchen to see what the commotion was about. But Ranjana sent him one of her queenly looks, and he scurried away. You must give the others time to get here, I told Esther. Clara, Robert and Thomas would not miss it for the world. And you must have a pretty dress, Esther. It will be my gift to you. Esther and Hugh were married in Saints Peter and Paul Church 4 days later. The church was restful, with translucent light filtering through the stained glass windows and forming columns on the floor around the altar. The smell of sea salt drifted in the air and mixed with the scent of Esther's lily bouquet. She was beautiful in the antique white dress with a tan underslip that Clara had rushed from Sydney with and which Ranjana had altered overnight. Uncle Ota was best man and stood by Hugh with Jallo on his shoulder. Clara was matron of honour. Peter took time away from the opera he was writing to come. As Hugh was a Catholic, there were no difficulties with their church marriage, but I wondered if Esther was thinking about Louis, and if her happiness was tinged with some sadness too. My thoughts drifted to Philip. Had I been wrong to turn him away? Perhaps all I had needed was time. Esther had loved Louis with all her heart, but she was also able to love Hugh passionately. While the priest was talking, I noticed the blue and black butterfly on Esther's bouquet. She glanced down and blinked. From the flush that rose on her neck, I realized that she saw it too. The butterfly stayed during the wedding vows and exchange of rings and was still riding on the bouquet when Esther and Hugh left the church as man and wife. Outside, Esther and Hugh posed by the front door for me to take their photograph. As I was about to depress the shutter, the butterfly took to the air and winged away towards the sun. Esther and I watched its path until it disappeared from sight. "What are you two looking at?" asked Uncle Ota, shading his eyes. "A gull?" Esther turned to me and smiled, her hands trembling. I waited for the mist in her eyes to clear before I took the photograph. Afterwards, when we sat down to the wedding lunch, Esther leaned over and touched my arm. "I understand now," she whispered. "He was trying to tell me to be happy." When Stuart Doyle heard of the success we'd had on the south coast with the Emerald Valley, he recommended that Australasian Films distribute it, even though it was a silent picture. Australian exhibitors were in a gridlock with American sound companies who wanted to gain a monopoly by enforcing expensive contracts on local operators. The Americans outpriced themselves, and only the large venues could afford the equipment required to screen talkies. The suburban theatres still needed silent films, and would do so until Australia developed its own sound technology. It was a small window left to us to have the Emerald Valley screened nationally, but I seized the opportunity. There was no glamorous premiere or publicity. The film's success snowballed by word of mouth. Everywhere the picture was screened, Freddie's dignity was restored, and he was recognised as one of the local industry's supporters. Ironically, the Emerald Valley generated a profit for Australasian films in America. It seems there is still some nostalgic interest among the public for silent films, Stuart Doyle wrote to Robert. And of course, the United States is a large domestic market. The Emerald Valley made more money for Australasian films than did For the Term of His Natural Life, which had also found itself outmoded overnight. Because the production costs of our picture had been lower, the profit margin was much higher. For the Term of His Natural Life, the budget for which had blown out to £60,000, made a loss. Stuart Doyle offered Hugh a permanent job with the new Cinesound Studios. I told him to take it. The steady income would help him support his new family. Esther was pregnant. On Freddie's birthday that year, I stayed with Uncle Ota and Ranjana, who had bought Esther's house from her after she had married Hugh, and drove to Waverley Cemetery in the afternoon to place flowers on Freddie's grave. It was something I had done every November since Freddie's death. The cloudy weather suited my mood on what had become the saddest day of the year. I shivered when I saw the cemetery gates. They reminded me of the first day I had seen them, when Freddie was laid in the earth and put away from me forever. I bought irises from the flower seller, then took the path to Freddie's grave. I had been in too much pain after my husband's death to think of tombstones, so Clara and Robert had stepped in and organised everything, including the verses from Tennyson's poem for Freddie's epitaph. I placed the flowers on the grave and knelt to read the gold lettering. I hold it true, whate'er befall. I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. The words I had read so many times suddenly touched my soul. A ray of sunshine burst through the clouds and sparkled on the graves around me. The darkness that had settled on me for so long lifted and floated away. It was as if for that moment Freddie had embraced me, then let go. I felt as if he had told me that it was time to move forward. I was returning from the path to the main gate when I noticed an old man shuffling ahead of me. I recognized him instantly. He did not look as formidable to me as he once had. I realized that he must have been visiting his wife's grave. "Dr. Page," I called. Dr. Page Sr. turned and squinted at me. I was almost expecting a reprimand for disturbing his peace, and was relieved when he smiled. "Mrs. Rockcliffe," he said, stepping towards me. "I was sorry to hear about your loss. It is a while ago now." 5 years, I told him. Dr. Page studied my face. His eyes looked dazed with pain. I realized that he was sweating, although the breeze from the ocean was cool. I reached out and took his arm. "Shall I walk with you?" I asked him. Tears filled his eyes, and I remembered the day I had taken the photograph of him and Philip. Perhaps if I had seen Dr. Page before visiting Freddie's grave, I might not have greeted him and continued to harbour resentment for his collaboration with Beatrice's lie. But I was aware now that I was as fallible as anyone else. I had no cause to be self-righteous. When I stood before Freddie's grave, I had finally understood how lucky I had been to have loved him. I had loved him unexpectedly and imperfectly, but I had loved him just the same. Before we reached the end of the path, Dr. Page stopped. I was worried that he might be feeling unwell. "I am too old to hide the truth," he said, his voice rising a tone. "You and Philip were in love, and I pushed you apart because I had my heart set on him marrying Beatrice." The force of the truth left us both breathless. Dr. Page had summed up the sorry tale. The cemetery was quiet, as if all the deceased who lay at rest in it were wondering what would happen next. Only the seagulls and the faint roll of the ocean assured me that I had not gone deaf. Beatrice deceived all of us, I told him, but I am glad that you and Philip have been able to mend your relationship. Dr. Page continued to look at me. "And you and Philip?" he asked. "That could not be repaired?" The pointedness of his question startled me. I shook my head. By the time Philip returned, I was already married. Dr. Page glanced back to the path. "Is your car waiting for you?" I asked him. He nodded, and I saw that the same Bentley that he had taken me in to meet Beatrice that first time was parked at the gate. The chauffeur opened the door and helped Dr. Page into the car. The old man offered to have his driver take me home, but I told him I had brought my own car. He opened the window so he could say goodbye again before the car took off. "Philip is taking leave in February," he said. "I wonder if you would like me to give him a message from you." The sense of light that had filled my heart at Freddie's grave burned even brighter. "Tell him that Adela says hello," I said. "Tell him to come and visit me sometime. It would be nice to see an old friend." Dr. Page smiled, and I knew that we had understood each other perfectly. The time that Clara and I had spoken of arrived, the day she and Robert would leave with the twins for Europe. She had waited until she felt the twins were old enough to travel, and, although she refused to say it, until she was sure that I could manage on my own. At 23 years of age, she was older than most serious performers embarking on their first tours, but I knew she would be well received. "I still cannot convince you to come with us, can I?" she said on the morning of their departure. I took her hand. "Wherever you are, we will always be sisters. You will always be in my heart." Clara kissed my hand and pressed it to her chest. "And you in mine." I remembered her wedding day and the gulf I had felt opening up between us. I could never have imagined myself living separately from my beloved sister, and now I would have to learn to do so. "What will you do?" Clara asked, "now that you will not be making pictures anymore?" "I will find something," I said, and thought of the letter I had received recently from Miles Dunphy, the leader of the new conservationist movement. Clara studied my face. She pushed a lock of hair off my forehead. "It is amazing," she said. "What?" "How much you have grown to look like Mother." Uncle Ota, Ranjana, Thomas and I were there to farewell Clara and her family at the dock. Mrs. Swan and Mary were there too. Esther was too heavily pregnant to come, but she and Hugh had sent flowers. After the ship disappeared through the heads, Uncle Ota and Ranjana suggested that I stay the night with them. I was grateful for the invitation. I had an empty feeling in the pit of my stomach. After everyone else was in bed, I sat up and watched Angel. She was still in the garden, the matron of the local brushtail possums. Cherub and her other offspring had taken up residence in the bush across the road. I took out the letter Miles Dunphy had sent me and reread it several times. "Dear Mrs. Rockcliffe, my breath was taken away by the picture you made in the Blue Mountains. It strikes me that you are a woman who will understand what I mean when I say that tree destruction is a kind of national complex, and too much of the character of this country has been ruined in the name of progress. I wish our forefathers had been as sensitive to the balance of nature as you clearly are, and had been more intelligent with their axe work. You may have heard by now of our campaign to save the blue gum forest in the Gros River Valley for the purposes of retaining this area of beauty for generations to come. I am writing to see if you will join us in our campaign and allow us to use your picture to raise public awareness of this issue. As we destroy our bushland, we destroy ourselves along with it. The following morning, I drove back to the mountains with a stronger sense of purpose than I had known for years. I arrived just after dark to see MP sticking his head out of his box. I thought of the possum population I had seen in Watson's Bay the previous night. In all the time I had been in the Blue Mountains, I had never seen MP with another possum. Why had he never had a mate? I smiled when I realized he may have thought the same thing about me. "You are not a young boy anymore, MP," I told him. "Hurry up and make some babies." The following morning I drove to the post office to collect my mail, which had been held for me. There was so much that the postmistress gave it to me in a hessian sack to carry it to my car. When I arrived home, I sat on the veranda and sorted out the letters. There were dozens praising the Emerald Valley, and a few requests for me to take ladies on bushwalks, which reminded me of the day Hugh and I went to the pub at Blackheath, and I had to laugh. Tour guide indeed. I sorted the post into 3 piles: personal letters from people I knew, letters from people I did not know, and bills. My eye settled on an envelope marked AMS, the Aerial Medical Service. My fingers trembled when I opened it. My vision blurred, and I had to blink a few times before I could focus on the 2 sentences the letter contained. "Can I come and see you? Tell me when." The following Saturday, I smoothed the skirt of my new dress and waited on the veranda for Philip to arrive. The dressmaker had sewn the lemon-yellow dress for me in haste because I had realized after years of wearing mostly trousers that I did not have any feminine clothes that were in fashion. I was consumed by a vanity I had not known in years. When I had risen that morning, I had stared at myself in the mirror, trying to guess what changes Philip might see in my appearance. I was almost 30, and the first flush of my youth was gone. The face that stared back at me was harder, and the set of the mouth was a little grimmer than before. But I hoped not too much so. An hour passed, and still there was no car on the road, and my hopes began to sink. What if Philip was not coming? What if there had been some emergency? I still did not have a telephone, so I had no way of knowing. I could go to the post office to see if there was a telegram, but I might miss him on my way. I sat on my hands and bit my lip. I was aware of a buzzing sound in the sky. I shaded my eyes to see a biplane heading in the direction of the house. The plane flew overhead with a roar, then circled and returned, this time so low that my skirt flapped in its slipstream. Does Philip own a gypsy moth, I wondered. The pilot brought the plane in to land in the empty lot next to the cottage. I walked towards it, aware that I had to stand back until the propeller had stopped spinning. The pilot lifted himself out of the cockpit. The figure seemed taller than I remembered Philip, and for one moment I thought I might have a tourist wanting a guide on my hands. Then the pilot removed his goggles, and my heart leapt when I saw Philip's face smiling at me. He had hardly changed since I had seen him last. His skin was slightly weathered, and he looked more rugged, but his eyes were bright and alive. "A plane?" I cried. "Does it belong to the AMS?" "No," said Philip. "We have Qantas pilots to transport us. This one's my own." There was a second cockpit in the plane, and rather than walk towards me, Philip went to it and pulled out a flying jacket. "I'll take you up while the engine's still warm," he said. "The weather is perfect." My heart sank. I was excited to see Philip, but the sick feeling that grabbed my stomach whenever I thought of that day in the Flying Fox returned to me. If I could not put up MP's box without becoming dizzy, how would I manage a flight in an aeroplane? "Come on, Adela," Philip said, holding out a helmet and goggles. "Suit up." I remembered the look in Philip's eyes when I had turned him away after Freddie's death. I cringed when I thought of the hurt I had inflicted. I had punished Philip because I was consumed by guilt. But Philip had done nothing wrong. All he had ever done was to try to help people, to love them honestly and to behave with dignity. Both Beatrice and I had let him down. I looked up at him. His eyes were full of warmth. What he was asking me to do now, to go up in the gypsy moth with him, was so much less than he had ever asked of me before. Surely I could manage such a simple thing to make him happy. My knees trembled and my heart pounded while Philip helped me into the flying jacket and strapped me into the passenger seat. I tucked the skirt of my dress underneath me. Once I was actually in the plane, my fear got the better of me. "Philip," I pleaded, "I am not sure I am up to this." Philip did not hear me. He strapped himself into the rear cockpit. Our helmets had ear cups coupled to rubber tubing, and there were mouthpieces. This was our means of communication. He taxied the plane to the end of the lot and turned into the wind. Then he opened the throttle, and we commenced our take-off run. My stomach lurched, and it took all my willpower not to be sick. The moth headed straight for the edge of the cliff at full speed, and if it was not for the roar of the engine as we became airborne, I would have deafened Philip with my scream. The plane vibrated as it climbed into the sky under full power. "Let's do a tour of the mountains," Philip said through the speaker tube. I was too terrified to look over the side of the plane. It had been a warm day down on the ground, but up in the air the wind bit my cheeks, and I could feel my lips cracking. After a few minutes of flying over bushland, we came to a valley, and Philip put the nose of the moth down so that we could take a closer look. I recognized that we were over the Groves Valley, and I could see the majestic bluegum forest. My heart fluttered with excitement, and for a moment I forgot my fear. It was a bigger picture of the wilderness than I had ever seen before. I was filled with awe. The rest of the flight was a wonder to me. I could not have imagined the exquisite beauty of the mountains from the air. I found myself envying birds. They saw the world as if from heaven, the treetops, the sparkling rivers and valleys. When Philip brought the plane into land next to my cottage, the nervous woman who had climbed into it an hour earlier emerged transformed. "So, you like flying?" Philip asked, helping me out of the jacket. I was so moved I was in tears. "I loved it," I told him. "Thank you so much." Philip's eyes danced over my face. "You haven't changed, Adela. You have always been susceptible to beauty." I blushed and looked towards the house. "Are you hungry?" I asked him. After lunch, we strolled through my garden and I showed Philip my lavender and the box I had made for MP. We stopped near the maple tree I had planted in memory of my mother and father and looked out over the silent, sweeping valley. Philip reached out and took my hand. I clasped his fingers in mine and felt his grip tighten. "When I saw the Emerald Valley, I knew that you had healed, that you had found a new purpose," he said, looking into my eyes. He is going to kiss me, I thought. When I had received Philip's letter, I had made up my mind that no matter what, I would not turn him away again. Now was our chance for happiness, and if he still loved me, I intended to take it. But he turned and stared up at the sky. "I have to hurry back now," he said. "I have some patients to see in Sydney tomorrow morning." "Are you back in Sydney?" I asked, my heart sinking. Philip had not come for love, he had come for companionship. I had once asked him if we could be friends, and I would have to be happy with that. I was thankful that at least he was only going to Sydney and not somewhere as far away as Cloncurry. "I've helped set up the structure of the medical service," he said. "Now it's time for me to return to my practice. But I will act as a relief doctor for the service from time to time." We walked back to Philip's plane, and I listened with fascination while he told me about his trips from Cloncurry into the Northern Territory and emergency landings in the mining camps of Mount Isa, about remote places in the Cape York Peninsula, and the starkness of the inland towns and their inhabitants' ability to endure the harshest conditions. Philip zipped up his flying suit. "Can I come again next Saturday?" he asked. "I could take you over the Hawkesbury River." Joy tingled through me. "You intend to come to the mountains again so soon?" I asked, unable to restrain a smile. "Are you looking for a guide?" The corners of Philip's mouth twitched in return. "No, I'm looking for a navigator." "What would a navigator do?" I asked. "She would keep an eye out for clearings devoid of tall trees, power lines, or livestock, in case there is a need for an emergency landing." "I think I could do that," I laughed. Philip strapped himself into the cockpit and waved. I watched the aeroplane lift into the sky and followed its path until it disappeared on the horizon. A gust of wind blew up from the valley and I hurried back inside. The nights could turn bitter even in late summer in the mountains, and it would be cold enough tonight to build a fire. I opened the door of my cottage and found MP snuggled behind a cushion on the sofa. He was lying on his haunches in a half-moon shape with his tail between his legs and his head tucked onto his tummy. I gently prodded his rump, but he was fast asleep. "Well, you had better hurry up and find that girl, as I've been telling you," I said. "I don't think I am going to be alone much longer." A few days later I walked to town to post a letter to Clara. She would not receive it until she arrived in Prague, but I wanted to write to her anyway. I had deliberated over mentioning Philip and decided not to for now. I had a superstitious notion that declaring my happiness prematurely invited bad luck. I had been in love with Philip and lost him to Beatrice. I had come to adore Freddie and had lost him too. Happiness in my own heart was enough for now. I stopped by the dressmaker's shop and caught my reflection in the glass window. In a trick of the light, I was doubled. Just outside my reflection was another image of me, slightly fuzzy at the outline and ethereal. I had been many people in my life. Adela Rutsikova, Adela Rose, Adela Rockcliffe. Who was I going to be now? I remembered my conversation with Miles Dunphy when I agreed to join him in the fight to save the Blue Gum Forest. "Opportunities are made, Mrs. Rockcliffe," he had said. "They don't happen of themselves. I don't want to read about the achievements of people with verve. I want to be one of those people myself. It's not enough to be intelligent and thoughtful. You have to be bold." Those would have been Freddie's sentiments exactly. Many people I loved were still with me. I had not lost Clara, Thomas, or Hugh, although they had all had brushes with death. Uncle Ota, Ranjana, Esther, Robert, and the twins were happy and well. Even MP, despite being without a foot, seemed to have managed to dodge predators. "You have to be bold," Miles Dunphy had said. Perhaps it was time I was. When Philip helped me suit up for the flight the following Saturday, I was not frightened at all. The butterflies in my stomach were due to my excitement in being with him. I could hardly wait to be airborne. But Philip's manner was less carefree than it had been the previous week. He seemed preoccupied. The flight that day was smooth. The Hawkesbury River and its tributaries encircled Greater Sydney, and I was astounded by its beauty. The shimmering water, the bushland and hills. But every so often I would see clearings in the forests and felled trees, and my vision of cherishing and protecting nature stirred in me. Philip brought the plane to land near a beach. I watched him take out the neatly packed portions of sandwiches, salad and fruit in precisely the order we would eat them. We used tin mugs and plates for our picnic, but he smartened the setting up with a lace tablecloth over the rug and linen napkins. "Apart from Uncle Ota, I don't know any other man with your domestic competence," I told him. "My mother wouldn't hear of a helpless male in the house," he said. "Although we had several maids, she taught my father how to iron a shirt, just so he'd know." "It sounds as if she was a very modern woman," I said, remembering Miloš stomping around our apartment in Prague and demanding Marie and Mother help him get ready. "She was 20 years younger than my father, and what he described as a healthy shock to the system," said Philip. "You remind me of her. It's very fashionable to be independent these days, but most women I know would still swoon if it would get a man's attention. You don't try to be fashionable, Adela. I like that. It's just how you are." Silence fell between us. I understood Philip's preoccupation now, for there was one thing left that stood between us and our happiness in being together: Beatrice. She was the unmentioned barrier to love. Sooner or later we would have to talk about her. I glanced at Philip's handsome profile. I would think of Beatrice later. All I wanted in that moment was to be blissfully happy. It might have been a false moment, or a stolen one, for despite Beatrice's behaviour, Philip was still a married man, but all I could think of was bathing in this sweet happiness a little longer. We returned to the cottage later than we had anticipated. The sky was darkening. "Come inside for a cup of tea before you go," I told Philip. "You need to warm up for the journey." Philip shook his head. "I'll have to get going while I still have the sun." He looked in the direction of the cockpit but made no move towards it. "What is it?" I asked. He exhaled and clasped his hands in front of him. "You know those places I told you about? The Catherine River and Alice Springs?" "Yes." "One day I'd like to show them to you, just as you want to show me the blue gum forest." A ripple of happiness ran up my spine. Yes, I would like that. Philip smiled and took my hand, kissing my fingertips. Then he pulled me towards him and kissed me on the lips. His mouth was soft, and it warmed me despite the breeze that was sending goosebumps up my legs. "Until next Saturday," he said, breaking away and reaching into the cockpit. "Stay," I said. Philip turned to me, his jaw set into a grimace. "Beatrice, she won't give me a divorce, you know," he said, looking at the ground, then back at me. "Some mixed-up notion she has that it makes her decent to be married, although we live on different sides of the globe. She even had the gall to say that divorce would be an offence to our religion." I had already guessed that Beatrice would not permit a divorce. I understood her character better now. No one could be happy without her permission. She did not want me to have what she could not. That was the reason she had tricked Philip into marrying her, not because she had loved him. "Stay," I said, reaching out my hand. "I can't marry you, Adela." "But you love me?" Philip's gaze softened. "Yes, I've always loved you." He took my hand and we headed towards the cottage. The love we would share would not be the innocent, wide-eyed love of our youth, but it would be just as precious. We would flout convention, for what had obeying convention done for us except keep us separated for years? Philip was one of the country's finest doctors. I had shown Australia in all its glory to the world. What else did we need to do to prove ourselves to others? It was time to live for ourselves. "I've got to wash my hands," said Philip when we reached the house. "They're caked in grease." I gave him a towel from the cupboard, and he headed towards the bathroom. I stood in the sitting room and imagined a cosy scene, Philip reclining in the armchair, marking flight paths on maps, while I wrote letters to government officials about why trees were more precious than progress. A roaring fire crackled in the fireplace. I drank in the pleasure of the image, knowing that I had reached a point of bliss. I had found my life's purpose and my life's partner. Something crashed in the kitchen. I rushed down the hall and turned on the light. The vegetable basket was upside down, and carrots, beetroots, and potatoes were scattered over the floorboards. MP poked his head out from the curtain under the sink, a cherry tomato clutched in his paws. "So," I said, happy to see him despite the mess he was making in my kitchen, "didn't I tell you it is not good to always be alone?" Something blunt fell on my head. I glanced down and saw a candle lying near my feet. I kept a box of them on top of my kitchen cupboard in case of emergencies. I looked up to see another, slightly smaller possum sitting on the cupboard and peering at me. "At last," I said to MP. "Good boy." I left the kitchen window open so that MP and his companion could leave when they had finished devouring my food, and closed the door behind me. I would clean up the mess in the morning. I walked out onto the veranda for one last glimpse of the sun setting over the valley. The cool air was bracing. A lone magpie drifted on the breeze. Something rustled in the bushes near the steps, perhaps an echidna or a wombat. "Adela?" Philip called. I walked back into the house. Philip was in the sitting room with the towel in his hands. His face was pink, and he smelt of rose soap. "What was that crash?" he asked. "Never mind," I said, taking his hand and leading him to the bedroom. He hesitated at the door. "Are you sure about this, Adela?" "I have never been surer of anything. I love you," I told him. He took me in his arms and kissed me. Suddenly all the heartaches I had accumulated over the years vanished. I had been wrong in thinking that Philip and I could not be innocent or thrilled by life because of all we had been through. Everything was new and fresh. I saw us, young again, sitting together on the sands of Wattle Beach, our future spreading out gloriously before us. Acknowledgements. Finishing a novel is like arriving home after a life-changing trip abroad. One's suitcase is filled with happy memories of the experiences and the people one met along the way. Silver Wattle was a sojourn mostly in my own country, and I have so many people to thank for making it a wonderful journey that I'm afraid I will not have enough space to mention all of them here. The story is expansive and multi-layered and involves many characters. It has been mostly a 7-day-a-week project. Therefore, first and foremost, I have to thank my family for their encouragement, especially my husband, Mauro, my father, Stan, and my 3 stepsons, Michael, Brendan, and James. I would also like to thank my friends for their understanding of my schedule and hope they have not forgotten what I look like in the daylight. I would especially like to thank my inspiring agent, Selwa Anthony, and wonderful publisher, Linda Fennell, who encouraged me through the many drafts it took to write the novel. Their care, interest, and experienced advice found their way into the weave of the story. Special mention should also be made of my talented editor, Nicola O'Shea, who is such a joy to work with, and Kate O'Donnell, my diligent HarperCollins editor, who went to great efforts to accommodate my requests for more time. Others I would like to thank at HarperCollins publishers include Shona Martin, publishing director, for her unwavering support for me as a writer, publishing assistant Denise O'Day, and the fabulous marketing, publicity and sales teams who put such energy behind sending my novels out to the wider world that I am in awe of how lucky I am to be published by such a dynamic, talented company. In terms of research, I am especially grateful to the lovely Jana Rich and her husband Dennis, who went to enormous lengths to help me confirm that my Czech references were correct and that the dishes in the novel were authentic. It was such a pleasure getting to know Jana and Dennis. It was worth writing the novel just to have met them. For helping with my wildlife research, I would particularly like to thank Sonia Stanvich, Scylla Norris, David Williams, Gary Taylor, Nick Eddards, and Paul Ibbotson of the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. I should also make special mention of Sue Small and Ella Atchell, who so graciously stepped into my role as brush-tail possum coordinator for the North Shore branch of Wires, so I could meet my publishing deadline. I would like to thank Debbie Sander of the Australian Film, Television and Radio School and Les Parrott for their helpful information on film technique in the 1920s. Others who I would like to acknowledge include John Scott, aviation historian, John McCulloch of the Australian National Aviation Museum, Ewan Simpson and Gerard Willems of the Conservatorium High School, Andrew Constantine of the Sydney Observatory, Gillian Simpson of the Australian National Maritime Museum, Helen Sartinis of the Immigration Museum, Simeon Barlow of the National Archives of Australia, Sally Orr of the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Queensland, Esme Foster of the Kiama Historical Society, John Merriman, Local Studies Librarian with the Blue Mountain City Library, Kay Donovan, and Fiona and Adam Workman. Finally, I would like to thank the helpful staff at the following libraries: Ku-ring-gai Library, Wollongong City Library, Leichhardt Library, and the State Library of New South Wales. Thank you to everyone for making the writing of Silver Wattle the trip of a lifetime. Author's Note. One of the great pleasures of writing Silver Wattle was researching the early Australian film industry. While it is not possible to list all my sources for inspiration here, some of my favourites included John Tulloch's Legends on the Screen, The Australian Narrative Cinema, 1919 to 1929, Elsa Chevelle's My Life with Charles Chevelle, Simon Brand's Picture Palaces and Flea Pits, 80 Years of Australians at the Pictures, Eric Reed's History and Heartburn, The Saga of Australian Film, 1896 to 1978, and Ken Hall's autobiography, directed by Ken G. Hall. The three-part DVD series, The History of Australian Cinema, 1896 to 1940, is an excellent starting point for anyone interested in learning about the beginnings of Australian film. Debate continues today among film historians about the role of the Combine in the decline of the Australian film industry as it did in the 1920s between local film producers and distribution and exhibition agencies. While I found the debate fascinating, I resisted being swayed by either side and tried to present the argument through the characters' views, as they would have seen them from their respective positions in the industry. Angel, the brush-tail possum joey, is reared on canned milk, but licensed wildlife carers are now trained to raise orphaned marsupials and have available to them special formulas and supplements to bring up these fragile creatures. Angel would have to have been a resilient possum to have reached adulthood on canned milk. Her upbringing in the 1920s was created in consultation with Sonia Stanvich, author of Possums, Rescue, Rearing, Rehabilitation and Release, and Scylla Norris, an experienced possum carer with Wires. Should you find an orphaned native bird or animal, or an injured one, do not attempt to raise or rehabilitate it yourself. Keep it warm and quiet, and contact your nearest wildlife group or veterinary surgeon for further advice. As the brushtail possum coordinator for my local branch of Wires, and as a licensed wildlife carer, I have seen too many sad cases where a member of the public tried to raise a joey and did not call us until it was too late to save the possum. Also, never take an animal from the wild and attempt to turn it into a pet. Applying a tourniquet and cauterizing the wound was the standard method of treating snakebite in the 1920s, but this is not the current recommended first aid treatment and could lead to serious injury or death. It is best to familiarize yourself with an up-to-date first aid book before venturing off the track in bushland. Snakes are protected native reptiles, and most bites occur because the victim was trying to kill the snake or pick it up. Have a healthy respect for snakes and their role in the environment, and leave them alone, or observe them from a safe distance if you find them fascinating, as many people do. If silver wattle has sparked your interest in Australian wildlife and you would like to learn more, you can start by viewing the Wires website at www.wires.org.au, contacting your nearest wildlife organisation, or by visiting your local library. Whilst on the subject of native animals, possums were called opossums in the 1920s, and koalas were referred to as native bears. To avoid confusing contemporary readers while maintaining some nuance of authenticity, I chose to use the term possum while keeping koalas as native bears. Finally, to give a flavour of the Czech language to the novel, I used the diminutives for Adela and Clara's names, Adelka and Klarinka, where appropriate. However, nouns in the Czech language, including names, change depending on their role in a sentence. I decided to stay with the A endings in all cases to avoid confusing non-Czech readers. For a straightforward guide on Czech pronunciation and grammar, I found David Short's Teach Yourself Czech very helpful. I hope you experienced as much pleasure in listening to Silver Wattle as I did in researching and writing the novel. Belinda Audio hopes you enjoyed the reading of Silver Wattle, written by Belinda Alexandra and read by Caroline Lee. For further information about the Belinda Audio range, please visit our website, www.belinda.com. If you liked this audiobook, please tell a friend.